You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with CEO of the Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Telegraph says NHS chiefs are warning that Royal Mail plans to cut second-class deliveries risks patient safety, suggesting letters arriving late are to blame for a quarter of missed hospital appointments. The Eye reports that Donald Trump wouldn't be afraid of meddling in the UK elections, according to a former US National Security Advisor. The Express leads with the Prime Minister saying Britain is ready for an economic takeoff. The Mail says civil servants are to go on strike after being told to come to the office 2 days a week. Pressure on junior doctors to end strikes, says The Times. The FT leads with Thames Water's parent company defaulting on its debt, which the paper says could be the catalyst for a messy restructuring at the owner of Britain's largest water utility. An ex-prisoner who met the Princess of Wales 4 years ago says Kate inspired her to turn her life around. That's according to the Mirror. And the Daily Star tells Brits to brace for Storm Kath, which could cause chaos across parts of the UK tomorrow. And The Sun reports that actors Sacha Baron Cohen and Isla Fisher divorce after more than 20 years together. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by the CEO of the Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the top story that's on many of the front pages and obviously that we're leading with, and that is the result of the IDF investigation into the killing of those 7 humanitarian aid workers in Gaza. Their findings are that it was a grave mistake and there were errors and violations in their operating procedures.
Yeah, well, colour me surprised. What a shock that was. What's shocking about this more than anything else is that it's not the first time the IDF have made this kind of mistake. It is the first time they've produced an investigation so quickly that seems to have been such an obvious mea culpa. And it's kind of... I wonder how much of this is really as a result of the outrage from the US and the UK, because it was British nationals among those that were killed, that's actually led to Israel looking at itself a little bit harder on this. But this is what happens when, and we have this a lot in this country, and people talk about national service and kind of trying to make the armed forces talk about it in a political way. If you politicise your armed forces, if you have conscripts, if you deprofessionalise it and you make it something that, you know, becomes all about something that you feel that you ought to do for political reasons, then you end up having an armed forces which is far more likely to be trigger-happy, to make mistakes, to make assumptions and base things on really flimsy evidence. Our armed forces make mistakes and have certainly engaged in friendly fire and things like that. But this kind of problem, as some of the charities in Gaza have pointed out, it's happening consistently. There is a structural problem within the IDF that really needs addressing, and some of that has got to be due to conscription and due to the political nature of the service, I think, in that country to some extent.
Well, the military dismissed 2 officers over the strike and reprimanded 2 others. But to your point, there's Jamie McGoldrick, the UN humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, and he said that the strike was not an isolated incident.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying. I don't think we know yet, for example, if the officers who've been dismissed are career IDF officers or are conscripts.
I think one of them's a reserve, at least.
For example. OK, that was something I didn't know. But they... there's a reason, of course, why the Israeli Defence Forces are heavily reliant on reservists and conscripts, and why Israel has a system of conscription, which is that it's, throughout its history, it's had to fight top to bottom as a society to continue to be able to live and survive, which is why, unfortunately, for that country, it has a system of such extensive conscription. I think what's quite interesting is that there are also veteran military commentators in this country who, and in the United States who've been drawing comparisons with urban warfare that the United States has prosecuted, the United Kingdom and its allies have prosecuted including in recent years against ISIS, among others, suggesting that some of those operations have had even higher or far higher civilian casualty rates in equivalent populations. So I think I don't think it's quite as clear to say you have a conscript army, therefore it's far more trigger happy. No. I think there's obviously been a disastrous and appalling offence, and what's happened undoubtedly has had more attention on it because it's, rightly or wrongly, it's had more attention on it because it's involved the citizens of Israel's allies, the United States, the UK, Poland, and others, who were killed in that. But it's also a symptom of a society which is, yes, a conscript army, but a conscript army in a democracy, and that there is scrutiny about this. The fact is that this is more of a mea culpa, as you say, that I think we've seen the IDF and the Israeli government undertake than in various other incidents in recent months. But it's still the case that this is an armed forces that is actually investigating and dismissing people for a start. Yeah. But unfortunately, they are still at war with a terrorist organisation which is celebrating its war criminals rather than dismissing or disciplining or apologising. Israel has killed even some of its own hostages
during this military exercise. And sometimes when it's been caught out doing these things, it has not dismissed those who were ultimately found to be responsible for it. And I think some of what's happening here isn't really just a mea culpa. It isn't just, it's our allies that are affected. It's because people have been threatening to stop selling them arms, that they've actually had to react to it. And Netanyahu has had to say, we are going to let more aid in. We are going to think about strategic exits and how this comes to an end, which is something that the allies of Britain and UK and US have been urging them to do since the start, and which Netanyahu's government has absolutely refused to do. And he's got a huge problem internally. He's had a lot of protests in the streets. There are people in Israel who are deeply unhappy at the way he's propagated this war. And then if his external allies as well are also starting to get edgy enough to say, have politicians on both sides of the Atlantic saying, well, no, we have to think about whether or not we're going to keep on supplying arms to these people if they're breaking international law in this kind of way, that he has to actually now bend and start being more flexible and start seeing things the way that perhaps other people would like to see an end to this conflict.
OK. I just want to bring in some related news to the region and the conflict. We're just hearing via the Reuters news agency, and that is that the United States is on high alert and preparing for a possible attack by Iran, targeting Israeli or American assets in the region. That's in response to an Israeli strike that killed an Iranian military commander in Syria. This from a US official. The quote is that we're definitely at a high state of vigilance, the official said, confirming that this evening. Very much at the start of this war between Israel and Gaza, America was very concerned, as was the international community, that it didn't spread, that there wasn't contagion and it didn't become a wider war. I mean, how worried are you at this statement now from the United States that they're preparing for possible significant attack by Iran?
I mean, there's always going to be the justified concern about further significant attacks by Iran. Let's be quite clear. What happened on October the 7th was in part an international attack by Iran, by Iran's proxies. It finances, it organises, it supports, it provides political and military and terrorist cover for Hamas, for Hezbollah. Let's remember, it also runs the same military and industrial institutions in Iran that arm Hezbollah and Hamas are also arming the Russian army in their continued assault on Ukrainian civilians. Those drones, the Shahid drones that the Russians are firing nightly in their dozens and scores of Ukrainian civilians, are made and sold by Iran. So I think it's simply a description of a statement of fact for the United States to say that it's on alert. This country, I think, would also be justified in being concerned about potential attacks by Iran or its terrorist proxies, because that's what this regime does and has done since 1979.
Isn't this a significant escalation, though?
Well, we've had attacks on American bases in the area before, since October the 7th. There was border posts and so on, which are manned by a handful of American troops, which have been attacked by Iran in response to things that's happened in Israel, around Syria and Jordan and the border areas. So it is significant if they're worried about another stepping up of that. But it is something which is also fairly inevitable, I think. And this is... Many people could say, from both sides, there's a proxy war in a way between the US and Iran. and that Israel and its right to exist is caught up in the middle of it. You've got Hamas and Palestine in there as well. Everyone's being used and provoked and prodded towards each other, and there are two big players behind both who want different things out of it. And, you know, the risk is, do we ever get to a really proper, full-on conflict between Iran and the US, and who would benefit from that? And the answer's got Vladimir Putin.
And the Houthis who are firing missiles at and other weapons at civilian and military, British and American and other nations shipping in the Gulf are, of course, also Iranian armed, funded and organised and sponsored proxies too. So I think it's I think it's not that long, I think, since we saw alleged Hezbollah cell in the UK arrested with the materials for bomb making, allegedly planning to target London as well. So I think this is a concern, but it's a concern that's been the case for 50 years. OK, let's try and get some other stories in. Let's move to the Telegraph, Susie, and the honey trap, as it's been described, story that's been around for a couple of days.
Yes, which is... it's amazing to me that this is getting such a small sort of piece on the front pages, and it's not covering more of them, because it's the thing that's driving most of Westminster a bit bonkers during the recess, and all the politicians and journalists. When Rishi Sunak comes out today and wants to talk about his tax cut, and all anyone's going to get asked about is this particular issue.
But it is the third day, though,
It is the third day. It's continuing on. We've had the revelations to start with that a dozen or so people in Westminster, MPs, staffers and journalists, were apparently targeted by spam texts asking for saucy photographs. And then we had apparently two MPs had responded with saucy, because who wouldn't? Just with saucy photographs. Then we've had yesterday, I think it was, William Ragg, the vice chairman of the 1922 Backbench Committee, saying that, well, he thinks he was the source of giving some of these phone numbers out, and he felt coerced to do it by somebody. And now we have another Tory MP, this one, Luke Evans, the Tory MP for Bosworth, who's put out a Facebook video saying he was sent a photo of a naked woman out of the blue over WhatsApp, and that he sent another one a few days later, and he passed it straight to the police without responding, which is, of course, the sensible, decent a normal, same thing to do.
And Mark, the police are now investigating, and then there's this whole question about MPs and their cyber security.
Yes, and this is something which an awful lot of people in Westminster and Whitehall are rightly sensitive to. I mean, the fact is, you know, even in, say, banking terms, there's something called politically exposed persons. If you're a parliamentarian, or even a family member of a parliamentarian, it's quite hard to do things like get a bank account, because the regulations are really tight because you're politically exposed, and they think there's a risk that you'll be targeted for blackmail or bribery and all the rest of it. There's a lot of focus on this. Remember, 10 days ago or so, the government and the parliamentary authorities revealed that the Electoral Commission and Parliament itself had been the target of sustained cyber attacks by Chinese state-aligned actors. There's a lot of awareness of this, but evidently there's still people who are, for one reason or another, getting a message from someone who says, oh, yes, it seems totally plausible that someone just messaged me completely out of the blue saying, I find you so unbearably attractive, but I'm going to say we've met, you can't quite remember me, here's a naked photo of me, would you send one back? And then in some cases actually do.
Yeah, all right, fair enough.
I think that kind of defies explanation, but it is something that politicians are, frankly, one of the growing list of reasons why a lot of people don't want to be politicians is that, as well as being targeted by lunatics and terrorists and hateful spam, hateful abuse on social media and all sorts of different things, you also, unfortunately, become a target for whoever these people are, organised crime, spies.
But you have to be aware that you could be a possible target.
And let's remember, this isn't cyber attacking. They're not being hacked. There's someone who's approaching them going, hi, mate, how are you? Would you like to see a saucy picture? Can I have one of yours? And they're stupid enough to go, yeah, all right. This isn't, you know, a huge, ridiculous way of managing to find a way back into someone's, you know, computer.
At the very least, it smacks of a poor judgment. You must leave it there for the moment, Mark and Susie. Coming up, the front page of the Telegraph with their headline, mail cuts pose risk to patient safety, say NHS chiefs. Do stay with us for more. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, CEO of the Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. Let's take a look at your paper, first of all, Susie, the Mirror. Labour tax con, Tory tax insult.
Yeah, there seems to be a couple of them on this page. So if you look at some of the Tory papers today, they'll say that a tax cut from the Tories is giving every family £900 extra per year. Labour have run the sums and say, well, actually, you're going to be nearly £900 worse off because there's sort of fiscal drag and stealth taxes and actually council tax hikes, which comes out of a different pot, and so therefore actually you end up worse off than you did to start with. And also that even though the Tories nicked Labour's idea for closing the non-dom tax loophole, that they're not doing it properly and they're actually giving people a chance to shelter their assets before they start taxing them, and that Labour would then manage to find some more money by doing that. So she's obviously doing her sums, which is, I suppose, good ahead of an election.
Mark's nodding in agreement.
She's managed to find a way to say that they're ahead.
See, I think it's always a healthy thing when both sides of politics are competing to explain to people why they want lower taxes. I think that this is a refreshing change, frankly, from what we've seen for most of the last kind of century. But it is notable that when Rachel Reeves rightly criticises the freeze on income tax thresholds, this stealth tax, she's then asked, would she end the freeze on tax thresholds? And she says, I want taxes on working people to be lower, but I'm not going to make any unfunded commitments. So no guarantees that they wouldn't carry on the same fiscal drag, because the problems are going to be exactly the same, even after they take over.
But that's still a bit more honest than the Tories, because when Jeremy Hunt gets asked the same question, he says, oh, yes, we're definitely going to cut it, but won't say how, or how he would possibly fund it, or when it might happen. She will at least be honest and say, well, it's not funded, so I'd like to, but we can't yet, which I suppose...
I think that's their policy too, to be honest,
well, yeah.
but they've got no money.
Well,